Premier of Ontario and his former Solicitor General are trying to legally resist being held accountable for the part that they played in the federal government's invocation of the never-before-used Emergencies Act, and it sounds like they have a choice to make that will come with potentially hefty legal consequences. Progressive Conservative Premier of Ontario Doug Ford and his former Solicitor General Sylvia Jones are trying to shield themselves from public scrutiny and arguably disclosure of internal communication by legally resisting the Commissioner's subpoena that is being used to try to compel them to testify at the Public Order Emergency Commission happening right now in Ottawa.
I believe there's also someone in court today attacking one of the subpoenas. So
the commission is a legislative requirement meant to scrutinize and determine justification for the invocation of the Federal Emergencies Act, which is basically martial law after it is invoked. Something that our overlord Prime Minister of Canada, Justin Trudeau, did on February 14th in response to an annoying trucker convoy that took to the nation's capital in Ottawa for 3 weeks at the end of January earlier this year.
The federal government has invoked the Emergencies Act to supplement provincial and territorial capacity.
The convoy was a political annoyance for Trudeau and the Liberal government, who had imposed heavy-handed COVID-related mandates onto Canadians, but it was also a direct result of annoyed Canadians being continually ignored by all levels of government, with any opposition to the indiscriminate infringements of the government into their everyday lives. And Doug Ford said himself that he stands shoulder to shoulder with Trudeau. Check it out.
Yes, I stood shoulder to shoulder with the Prime Minister. These folks were camping out, everything from whirlpools, disrupting downtown, disrupting the lives of the people of Ottawa. We've worked collaboratively with the mayor and the Prime Minister over at the borders. They were holding up $1 billion of trade every single day, getting across our borders. We were getting phone calls from governors. It's unacceptable.
So why is he being dishonest in saying that he wasn't asked to testify?
How come, Premier Ford, you're not testifying at this inquiry? Were you asked? Did you decline?
I have not been asked. Again, I want to repeat what I said earlier. We have top officials from the OPP that were running the operation with conjunction with municipal police agencies and the RCMP.
Because he was asked, and he tried to get out of testifying by offering written submissions. It was at that point that the commissioner issued a subpoena for him to testify at the commission. And repeatedly, the judge responsible for overhearing the arguments from Ford et al.'s lawyers and both the commissioner and the Ottawa residents' lawyer asked whether or not the skirting of the commission requirement under this guise of parliamentary privilege was being used as a sword or as a shield. And we are going to call on Premier Doug Ford to come out of hiding, to comply with the subpoena and testify in front of the commission as required by the mandate of the Federal Emergencies Act. We're immediately launching a campaign at stophiding.ca, where we have a petition that calls on Ford to testify at the commission hearings. We have also hired a billboard truck with a similar message that will start its route around Queen's Park in Toronto on November the 3rd. At Doug Ford's stay application on November 1st, which is fancy legalese for him, again, trying to squash the subpoena issued to him and Sylvia Jones, compelling them to provide testimony at that legislatively required commission, his lawyers tried to argue that he and Jones's parliamentary privilege was a constitutionally protected right, and that not issuing a stay would result in irreparable harm to both parliamentarians. Oddly, the irreparable harm wasn't in response to providing actual testimony, but in the consequences of the choice not to testify should it be made. Yet other parliamentarians have readily complied with testimony requests. Ford and Jones are the anomalies here. And no other parliamentarian has ever invoked this privilege in a commission, so there is no clear precedence either way. It's actually a bit of a mess. But the provinces all had to be consulted before the federal government could invoke the Emergencies Act, and Ottawa, where the trucker convoy took place, was in Ford's province, where Jones was the Solicitor General at the time, and so she had the responsibility to oversee emergency management and policing, etc. These are clearly key players in the entire unfolding. On merit, they should be testifying as part of their parliamentary duty, not hiding behind it. Ford and Jones are invoking parliamentary privilege on the grounds that one day of testimony would distract from their parliamentary duties on the provincial level. But again, no one else seems to be citing this inconvenience, for lack of a better word. And the lawyer for the Ottawa Residents Coalition said that it would be a grave shame if the inquiry, a socially important process, were labeled as an interference or a distraction. And on the note about constitutionality, everyday Ontarians and Canadians are still reeling from the fallout of the provincial and federal government's COVID-19 response that saw indiscriminate infringement on constitutional rights, freedoms, and civil liberties without due process or clear demonstrable justification.
So effective immediately, we're extending the emergency declaration and prolonging the stay-at-home order province-wide for an additional 2 weeks, for a total of 6 weeks. We have implemented the strictest measures in all of North America.
So it's rich that all of a sudden those rights and freedoms matter again when trying to skirt judicial process by an elected official. Regardless, a theme in the courtroom was that the choice not to testify will naturally come with consequences. Where else have we heard that slogan about choices and consequences? Let me refresh your memory.
And I have very little patience for people who aren't immunized in healthcare. And that will be, we've had a vaccinator mask policy for influenza. We will have a very similar policy that if people choose not to be immunized and you work in healthcare, then you will not be able to work in certain settings without taking additional measures. There will be consequences for that decision.
And now is the time for people who are still resistant to getting vaccinated to realize that that choice, which has consequences on putting our kids at risk, which has consequences at having us risk more lockdowns because they haven't chosen to get vaccinated yet, that there will be consequences for those people in not being able to go to a gym or a restaurant, not being able to go to a movie theater, not being able to get on a train or a plane.
All in all, Ford's lawyer referred to Ford and Jones as having an intolerable position by being forced to make a choice where the judge reminds the lawyer that they could easily waive privilege and testify. Miraculously, Ford's lawyer refers to that as coercion. I guess they overlooked indiscriminate COVID-19 vaccine passports that coerce people into injecting themselves with a faulty pharmaceutical product over threats of job loss, and then prevented them from various social aspects of civil society. At the end of the 4-hour hearing, Judge Fothergill decided to reserve his judgment. He said that he thinks the worst that will happen is an order with reasons to follow, which he will provide by November the 8th. Now, November the 10th is when Ford and Jones are set to testify, so certainly they both have choices to make. Will they comply with their parliamentary duty, as every other parliamentarian all across the country has done so far, and testify? Or will they cling to this notion of unprecedented invocation of parliamentary privilege and be found in contempt? Let Ford know that you want to hear his testimony. Sign our petition and donate to offset the costs of our billboard truck at stophiding.ca. For Rebel News, I'm Tamara Ugolini. We are standing shoulder to shoulder with the commissioner because we want Ford and Jones to testify, as should be their parliamentary duty. If you agree, sign our petition and follow our reports at stophiding.ca. And there you can also chip in if you're able to help offset the cost of that billboard truck. That's stophiding.ca.